muted the YouTube.
Yes, okay.
Yeah, especially because it's on a little delay. It'd be really weird.
Okay.
All right, everyone, we are currently live.
Okay. Jeff, should we get going and assume that Joanne and George will be signing on?
Yes.
Okay. So I will get ready to read. Oh, here comes Joanne. To read our script. So, as a preliminary matter, this is Ashley Erisman, Chair of the Nantucket Conservation Commission. Permit me to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. We get going and assume that Joanne and George will be signing on.
Yes.
Okay. So I will YouTube open. So members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Mark Beal.
Mark Beal is here.
Seth Engelborg.
Aye.
Erisman, aye. Ian Golding.
Aye.
Dave LaFleur.
Aye.
Maureen Phillips.
Your mic's off, Maureen.
Maureen Phillips.
Oh, sorry. No, I screwed up because I somehow managed to get off
meeting.
of.
I'd like to remind everybody that this meeting
I'm sorry, I
is
screwed up. I've
being
got
recorded by
the
video
YouTube
and
playing
audio.
at the same time. I
So
apologize.
saying that, I'll go turn it over to Roberta.
Close the YouTube.
Okay, so there's a little script that they're asking us to read. So let me,
Okay.
should have been prepared. We had 30 minutes to prepare and I didn't.
Oh,
Sorry about
kills
that.
bells.
Maureen, why don't you mute?
Okay, sorry. I muted YouTube. All right. So that's what I needed to do, right?
Yes. And then Joe Topham.
Present.
Okay. Staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Jeff Carlson.
Here.
Joanne Dodd.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
Thank you. Anticipated speakers on the agenda, please respond in the affirmative. Jamie Feely.
Here.
Dwight Dunk.
Here.
Stephen Cohen.
Here.
Okay. Good evening. This open meeting of the Nantucket Conservation Commission is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12th, 2020. Due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of COVID-19 virus, we have been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend public gatherings, and as such, the governor's order suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The order, which you can find posted with the agenda materials for this meeting, allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely so long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will feature public comment. For this meeting, the Nantucket Conservation Commission is convening by video conference via Zoom app as posted on the town's website, identifying how the public may join. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and that all attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that other folks may be able to see you and to take care not to screen share your computer. Anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording. Meeting materials. All of the supporting materials that have been provided members of this body are available on the town's website unless otherwise noted. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda unless Ashley Erisman, notes otherwise. We are now turning to the first item on the agenda. Before we do, permit me to cover some of the ground rules for effective and clear conduct of our business and to ensure accurate meeting minutes. I, the chair, will introduce each speaker on the agenda. After they conclude their remarks, the chair will go down the line of members, inviting each by name to provide any comments, questions, or motions. Please hold until your name is called. Further, please remember to mute your phone or computer when you are not speaking. Please remember to speak directly and clearly in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. For any response, please wait until the chair yields the floor to you and state your name before speaking. If members wish to engage in conversation with other members, please do so through the chair, taking care to identify yourself. For items with public comment, after members have spoken, the chair will afford public comment as follows. Staff will activate the chat feature on the YouTube. Members of the public who have comments or questions can use this feature to communicate with the public body. Instructions are on the town's website. The chair and/or staff will do their best to address the questions and comments. Finally, each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by roll call vote. So I do ask, since there are so many of us, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand so I can see you and then, call on you and we're not shouting over each other.
And Ashley, can I just interrupt for a second? Can you hear me? It's George Pucci calling.
Yes. Hi, George.
Hi, I'm going to be on audio only. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I'm having difficulty with my internet and cell connection from where I'm calling, so I want to be able to move around. So I'm just going to stay on audio, and I'm going to you can just tell me, and I'll unmute myself.
Okay. Thank you, George.
You're welcome.
Okay. So with that, we will begin tonight's meeting. Our sole agenda item is Sconset Bluff and the enforcement action. Jeff, I was hoping you could maybe start us off and give a little summary.
Sure. So just to kind of play catch up for everybody from where we left off, we kind of have a couple different matters tonight that are both kind of related. The first one is obviously the continuation of the discussion related to the fill that was put down that triggered the initial enforcement in the middle of December, and the chemical testing that was going on, and the second round of chemical testing that was requested, to have a discussion about that material and what the how that's going to proceed is kind of the first matter, and that's kind of the continued matter. And then the newer matter just to be discussed is kind of what occurred at the end of last week with SBPF requesting a waiver from the, I will say it wrong, the incident command group with the town for COVID-19 related to the construction moratorium from emergency order number 1. That waiver, how that relates to our permit, and then some work that was done out in the Sconset and Geotube area and the Hoyks Hollow area, how that kind of all interrelates, and to see if there's any action that needs to be taken in that regards as well. So hopefully that kind of encapsulates that for everyone for where we are.
Thank you, Jeff. Are there any questions from commissioners to begin with? Ian?
Is there a protocol for public comment in this proceeding?
Jeff?
Yes, there is, Ian. So people that want to make comment publicly, some submitted comments in advance that we can go through. Other than that, when we get to the appropriate time for public comment, Ashley will say that it's time for public comment, and anyone who is on the YouTube station can chat there, and I can read those to people until I have it open, and they can comment that way to get that stuff in, or they can simply ask that their, maybe their correspondence from earlier can be put into the record orally. None of them are too long, but those are the provisions for people to comment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll just add that really quickly. We don't hand out the Zoom info to the public just for the fact that this would get crazy, and then you'd be dealing with a lot of interruptions, and we would go from, there's 25 on YouTube now, from our 13 to, having almost 40 little boxes, and I think it would just be too unruly. So I think the YouTube has been selected for that purpose.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jeff. Mark?
Jeff, can the YouTube people see and hear us all the time?
Yes, sir. They can see exactly what we're seeing right now. It's a little bit delayed by like 10 seconds, but I can tell you right now, I can watch myself speak on YouTube right now. So they see it, and Andrew, who's the town of Nantucket on our screen, is doing a really great job at getting whoever's speaking up on the screen, or if it's more of a group, keeping that grid display. So he's kind of actively editing it together as we go, but everyone should be able to see and hear everything that we're seeing and hearing.
And you said there's 25 people already on YouTube that are watching us?
27.
Thank you.
No problem.
All right. So I guess, Jeff, with your little synopsis, do you suggest we start then with the sand sampling report?
Yeah, I think for continuity wise, I think to start there and kind of get into that issue first, because that's the longer ongoing issue. If you have any questions about that, but then you also can just probably roll that into the work that was done at the end of last week. They're kind of all connected to some degree, but I think working towards moving that other longer standing issue along would probably be the most useful use of time right now.
Okay. I guess, does a representative from SBPF want to give a quick synopsis of your sand sampling?
So actually, if it's okay, this is Stephen Cohen. I'll give a brief overview. Okay?
Yes.
So just how did we get here? Like, why are we here? Just a brief. I know those of you who are on social media have heard all kinds of things.
So, Steve, I don't want to interrupt, but I want to keep it away from social media and really just focus on the nuts and bolts of this, especially since we're meeting virtually, to keep it clear.
Yeah. Okay. There's a lot of misinformation out there, so I'd just like to give a brief summary, and then Dwight Dunk will deal with the technical issues, and Jamie can deal with any boots on the ground questions. Okay. So when SBPF delivered sand back in the fall, some of that sand was grayish and it had a little bit of a smell to it. And it was questioned, was this sand in any way problematic? And there was also some amount of debris on the beach, and there was some question as to where it was coming from. And what we did was the sand had been tested before it was used, and it came from, just local sites, and it didn't come from any contaminated sites. And we had confidence that it was not contaminated, but the reason why it was gray and smelled a little bit was because sand that has a higher concentration of silt or mud or clay in it looks a little different than beach sand. And in fact, what I want to be clear is that the compatibility testing that's supposed to be done is for beach sand, which is different than the sand that's in the bluff. It's not the bluff sand. If you look at the bluff itself, it actually looks more like the sand that that was put down that's gray than the sand that we normally put down, which looks like beach sand, which is more brown, because it doesn't have the fines and the silt and the clay and those kind of things in it, whereas it doesn't have as much. So the sand that was put down did have a small amount of debris in it, and there was also a higher amount of debris that was coming out of the bluff, which has irrigation systems and septic systems and foundations and patios and all kinds of things. And there's actually a higher amount of debris coming out of areas outside of the geotube system than there are at the geotube.
Sorry to interrupt you again, but let's try and keep it to the new sand sampling report. We don't need to summarize everything that's happened since December, and really keep it to new information so that we can get to it. Thank you.
Okay. So just on the sand sampling, in plain basic English, the sand was determined to be clean and safe and not to have any contamination whatsoever outside of normal expected amounts of various metals and biologics that are in the naturally occurring rate. And the commission at the last meeting was presented information by experts to attest to that, And one of those people was her job is to determine how to clean up these things. And her recommendation was no action was needed because there was nothing to clean up, because it was all within DEP guidelines and otherwise safe. The commission, I think, prudently said, well, if you think that you, SBPF, think that these levels are going to be reduced over time, let's see if that actually happens, and asked us to do a second set of sampling. So the second set of sampling came back to demonstrate two things. One is that the rates have gone down as predicted, and that there are higher levels, if not, or there are matching levels, if not higher levels, in the control samples taken outside of the geotube system, showing that you would naturally find the same things in the sand that was put down as you would find elsewhere in the sand coming out of the bluff. So we are 100% confident that there was no contamination, that these were naturally occurring rates of various items that were tested for, and that there was no public health issue whatsoever. Of course, the commission was prudent to require this testing to make sure that that was the case, and we're pleased it was. And we think that the commission now, having that information, should lift any restriction on pushing the sand over or putting new sand on top of that sand. And Dwight, is that basically correct?
Yes. We sent the supplemental sand sampling report over to the commission electronically on March 17. I provided a cover letter that summarized essentially what Stephen just said. At the last meeting, March 4, the discussion focused on the higher concentration or the higher counts of total coliform, the fact that fecal coliform is a constituent of total coliform, and there's a question, well, how much? The supplemental round was conducted the following Monday after that meeting on Wednesday, the 4th. And as we had discussed, as the literature had predicted, and I think as Mr. Berman agreed, that in the harsh conditions on the template, that weathering would yield lower counts of bacteria because it's an in-hospital environment. And that's what we found. That's summarized in Table 2 of the letter that I submitted. The backup data is in the supplemental sand report. And what we were seeing in March was that the total coliform counts basically ranged from about 3 counts per gram up to 91 counts per gram. And fecal as a constituent of that was essentially a non-detect, but less than 0.2 up to a max of 3.2. The 3.2 was found in the sample with 158. So, that's 2 orders of magnitude lower. We also did some sampling to kind of establish the background along that reach. One was up at Hoyks Hollow because that is an area that there's more human activity with people using the ramp to access. Again, we had total coliform that was in the same ranges that we're seeing on the template, with fecal essentially non-detect. Then down south of the installation, where it's all natural dune, where there's no coir rolls or anything like that. So it's all natural. And that actually had among the highest total coliform up in the 90 range, but it also had the absolute highest counts of fecal coliform in there. And there's plenty of sign of wildlife activity, which we believe is the source. Also, when we looked at the nutrients, I didn't go into that in my cover letter, but it's in the supplemental report. The nutrients are essentially similar in the background as the template sands. And again, that 53 Baxter dune sand actually had the highest TKN, which is correlates with the high fecal coliform. So with that, as we had suggested on March 4th from the literature, that the total coliform counts, which are naturally occurring soil bacteria, have declined significantly on the template. As we mentioned, we don't, we can't tell you what the actual source is of that coliform. More than likely, it's topsoil that was mixed in with that when it was in the source site, because those are found in topsoil. And now that it drains very well on the template dry, those counts have died. Those bacteria have died off. And with that, the previous results show that there was no chemical, no metals. The metals are well within natural.
This is Maureen.
So, yes.
Ashley, my audio went out for a bit just then. Did anybody else have a problem?
No.
No.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
That's fine.
Sorry about that. I have it on my thing. But anyways, with that,
it's probably something I did, so don't worry about it. Thank you.
But going back to the December 11 hearing, when this initial sampling was requested, the concern was whether or not this material brought out in the autumn of 2019 was contaminated. These 2 rounds show that it's not contaminated by anthropogenic sources, the chemicals or metals, and that the bacteria is now very similar to natural conditions out in the Wisconsin area.
Thank you, Dwight.
Okay.
Are there any questions from commissioners about the sand reports? Again, if you could raise your hand if you have a question. Okay, no questions?
Actually, not a question, but one other thing that's in the report that the public, I don't know if they can see the report, I'm sure it's online, is the information about the debris that was collected, and there were pictures of it and things like that. And just to put it in sort of simple terms, the amount of debris that was collected would fit in a large wheelbarrow. Is that right, Jamie?
Yeah, Stephen, those photos were not part of the 317 letter.
Yeah, they were submitted.
And I got tied up with some calls. I did not get them in this afternoon. Okay. I just sent them over to Jeff and Joanne. Now I have them on my screen, so when we get to the next discussion point, I can share my screen and share these photos.
Yeah, no, but Jeff, just with relation to whether or not there was anything in the sand, that shouldn't have been the amount of debris in the, in that long distance was about the amount that you would fill a large size wheelbarrow. Just
right.
Right. I think,
just,
so let me interrupt for a second. I think that's what's come out of the template. Unfortunately, some of this material is buried in there until exposed. There are things we might not see. So I don't think it's the best to make assumptions that that's the only material in there, until it's actually pushed over, mixed up, whatever, because that's really what's coming to the surface.
Right. Absolutely. That's what has come out both, in the maintenance that's been done and in the erosion of the template that's happened, and that's why we have protocols in place now to make sure that any other debris that comes out in the future is gathered.
Yes, Dwight.
Actually, just the weekly inspections that had been occurring, they stopped after the week of the 20th, March 20th, but the weekly inspections throughout the end of December, January, February, and up through most of March, yielded about a half cubic yard of brick and debris. That's the weekly inspections and removal of material, either can be easily reached off the lower part of the template, or which is right at the base of the template, with essentially none having been collected for the past several weeks. And then getting into what Stephen was talking about, the movement of the sand on top of the template in a means to remove debris that's in the template, that yielded about another half cubic yard of debris on Friday, and that was mostly bricks. So far since December, there's been about 1 cubic yard of man-made material, and it's mostly brick, a few other items, some PVC pipe sections, cable, wood, but so far, it's been about 1 cubic yard total.
Thank you. I have a question about your delivery submission with the delivery dates, the loads, amount of yards per truck, those sorts of things. And I just have questions about how you list your sources, because the sources are listed, for example, as Baxter Road from Sandlot, Baxter Road from South Shore Road, Baxter Road from Sankaty Road, Baxter Road from TCE. So what does this mean, and how do we know where the actual material came from based on this?
So I can answer that. That is the trucking invoices that are provided basically give you the route from where they pick the material up. And so that's separate from analysis that we have done and that we submit. So after we get an analysis, some of those materials get mixed together at the sand lot. Sometimes, if the timing worked out, they would go directly from the source lot. And so that's what you're seeing in those invoices. The truckers are essentially reporting where it was picked up and where it was delivered, separate from the sand analysis that's done and submitted to you all.
Okay, I think moving forward, it might be good to have, listed where this material actually was sourced from for each trucking delivery, to avoid confusion in the future.
Right now that's done for the testing, right? And you want it to also be done for the delivery? Is that what you're saying?
I think so, because again, it's very unclear based on these delivery tickets where this stuff is coming from.
So if I could speak to that point, I think when we were collecting sand that became available and that was analyzed, sometimes we were getting 250 cubic yards, sometimes we were getting 500 cubic yards, and sometimes we were ready to deliver bluff and sometimes we weren't. And so depending on the timing, when we get the analysis back and everything else, that's why we've gone ahead and rented this parcel so we can collect the material from various contributing sources that have been tested, stockpile it in one location, and then when we're ready to do a delivery to the bluff, we do it then. And I think that given the fact that we're talking about now screening material going forward, that process is going to be even more important to get it all to the sand lot, the stockpile, and then to run it through a screening machine if it's come from a non-virgin site in order to follow the new protocol that we proposed.
Okay. Seth?
Hi. So I don't know if I understand the outline correctly, but perhaps there could be a delivery ticket from the source lot to the sand lot, and then again another one when the aggregated sand is delivered from the sand lot to the project location.
Thank you.
Yeah,
we could do that, right, Jamie?
Yeah, I think that happens anyway. Just a matter of reporting it a little bit differently.
Looks like Dwight, do you have a question?
Well, I was just going to say that up until now, we've been submitting the documentation of the material that's been submitted to the template. So as Jamie was saying, stuff that was composited essentially at the sand lot, then it was just shown as coming from the sand lot. But to Seth's comment, if Jamie can keep track of what goes to the sand lot, and then what comes from the sand lot would be a composited sand that goes to the template. But that way you can see X cubic yards went to the sand lot, X cubic yards left the sand lot, and X should be the same, or pretty much the same, except for some settlement and things like that. But it should be essentially the same volume, and that way that material from the sand lot was the composite of those sites.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from commissioners about the sand delivery, Ian?
Well, in listening to Mr. Cohen's summary or summation, I think, people who are new to this, watching this on YouTube, might not understand how contaminated the sand was initially. And so I'd like to read from OHI's summary. And it says, this report was prepared to provide results of the supplemental sand sampling plan conducted at the SBPF Erosion Control Project in response to the Commission's direction at the March 4th meeting. And then in summary, it says, 1, total coliform counts since January have decreased by 2 or 3 orders of magnitude in all areas. In other words, there was a reason why there was an enforcement order, because as we found out, there was very high contamination in some ways. And so I just want that to be on the record so that people understand that this was a serious episode.
Ian, I appreciate that
Just remember, please, you have to go through me. Don't just butt in, or it could be crazy on this virtual.
Right. Ashley, I apologize. Through the chair, I appreciate Ian's perspective, but I think the use of the word contamination is highly prejudicial and inaccurate. What we're talking about here is sand that came out of people's yards, most likely that had coliform from bunnies and rabbits and deer and stuff like that, is what you find in nature. And the fact that it went down doesn't mean that it was initially dangerous before it went down. And in fact, the expert report said it wasn't. So just because it was present doesn't mean it was dangerous. It was less than what you find naturally occurring slightly down the beach. So was there fecal coliform? Yes. Is that contamination in the sense that it was some kind of public safety issue? No. Did the commission do a very prudent job in making sure that there was no public health concern? Of course. The right things were done here. But there was never a contamination or a public health or a safety issue, despite the fact that there were things that none of us really want to eat. Okay.
Okay. So I guess to further that, tests have shown, I guess, low levels of potential contamination. Either way, what was dumped on the beach was inappropriate, incompatible beach material, regardless of what the testing showed. It had foreign physical contamination, i.e. the bricks and things like that in it. So it was inappropriate material to be dumped over the bluff.
Right. Well, I think that one thing that has come out of this is that there was a common practice in place that was dealing with a compatibility standard that did not capture as much as could and should be captured. And now for SBPF and all other sand projects, the commission can now put in place requirements that will prevent any issues beyond compatibility, which, the commission knows and now the public should understand, really just dealt with grain size. And the intent now is to make sure that it is clean, it is, meets what a common person would think of as compatible and not a lesser strict technical standard. So, some good has come out of this, not that it should have taken a problem to find the solution, but I think that, there will be a better process island-wide now that we've gone through this.
Any other questions or comments from commissioners? Okay. So Jeff, I guess we should move on to the discussion about what occurred last week.
Madam Chair, before we move on, does the commission want to vote to release the restriction on maintenance of the template and allow for sand contribution, mitigation sand to be put down?
I'd rather wait until we finish the discussion fully about what's occurred.
Okay.
So
Jeff, it looked like you were beginning to talk. I think you're muted now.
You're muted, Jeff.
Yeah, sorry, I'd gone with the space bar on mute and then slipped off. But so at the end of last week, just to kind of go over again from our end, is SPPF had applied to the emergency operations team through the town for a waiver to the construction moratorium under emergency order number 1. I know that's super confusing because we don't normally deal with those. And what they were seeking was if our restrictions were lifted, if they would even be able to do the work as it's not specifically called out underneath that emergency order, which was the stopping of all construction projects, essentially, and work and social distancing. They had applied for that, and then some work occurred as far as rebuilding the sand ramp at Hoyks Hollow, which isn't directly covered under the SE 48 2824. And then some work, it looks like, and we inspected that site over the weekend, and then again this afternoon. I was back at the site to look at it. It looks like some regrading on the top of the template took place, and then some sand was distributed kind of to both sides of the track that was regraded, which would be at kind of the top of the geotubes and then closer to the coastal bank. And that occurred on the ramp itself at Hoyks Hollow was Thursday, and then the work on the template was Friday. Dwight and I had spoke in there on Thursday too about catching up on that, and there was a little bit of confusion and some moving around, but I think that's why we're here to talk about it now, is to figure out what work was done. Obviously, the cease and desist from the enforcement order was still in place, so whether or not it was in line with that, and then if there's any other additional action that you guys need to take.
Thank you, Jeff. Dwight?
Yes, if I may just comment on that. Thank you, Jeff. Good summary. We had talked, Jeff, that the going through the EMT was, a second gate because we didn't know if the work crews could get out there. So in case they, for getting out there to repair the ramp, because without the ramp in place, nothing can be done. And then with the submission of the supplemental work, sand sampling demonstrating that everything, the first round showed no anthropogenic constituents. The second round showed that all the bacteria had, died back to essentially the background. And in that letter, we know it was dated March 17. We understood that the March 18 public meeting was going to be canceled. In that letter, we requested that the commission, authorize through Jeff, through the department, to respond to us, because we requested in that letter to resume the maintenance work now that we've seen that the sand was clean. We had not heard back from the commission through the emergency management correspondence. Jeff was a party to all that, and through those discussions in the letter, not hearing back from the commission for any additional information, any additional restrictions, we thought that the commission had allowed the resumption of the maintenance work. Now, the work on Friday did not involve the maintenance work of recovering exposed tubes. The work was spreading, as we had talked about at the various meetings, spreading sand out back and forth to identify, to expose any of the man-made material and collect that so that it would not be in the top layers if and when it gets pushed over. The work on Friday did not involve that, and I'm just going to share my screen because I didn't get to. I don't know if people can see the screen.
I cannot. No,
There you go.
Okay, can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay, these are just some photos that were taken on Friday of the template facing south, the north end. The materials that have sloughed off was from the vehicle, from the equipment vibration in movement. There was no sand that was purposefully pushed off to recover exposed tubes. You can see plenty of exposed tubes in here. Stuff that had sloughed off got stuck, captured on the tubes. Another view with essentially all the exposed tubes and beach sand. This is probably a location where the sloughing did extend over and cover some of the tubes. And here's about the half cubic yard of debris that was collected after the work on Friday from one day of regrading the top of the template. It moved about 2,000 cubic yards of material back and forth, and 1/2 cubic yard of debris was exposed and removed. So just wanted to share those pictures. I'll stop sharing my screen now. But as Jeff and I discussed, that there were the 2 gates. The EMT was just to make sure, coordination was just to make sure that the construction crews could even get down there to do any of the work. And the letter that we sent over, where we identified that everything was now not contaminated, we requested permission to, or we had planned to get out there to resume recovering the exposed tubes, especially after that March, 6 to 8 storm that exposed quite a bit of the lower tubes. So that's the where things stood. We did not hear back from the commission, but no, there was none of the sand was purposefully pushed over, and the tubes in the end returns remain exposed.
And no sand was contributed. No new sand was brought in.
Right. No, in the EMT, we identified there was no new sand to be brought in. It was just there's plenty of sand on top of the template to recover exposed tubes.
Was there sand brought to Hoyks Hollow for the ramp?
Yes, Jeff had asked about that in the questions for the EMT, and we had identified 50 to 100. I think it was a little over 100 cubic yards material was needed, and it's the same source and material that is used to maintain, repair the ramp as needed throughout the year.
Thank you. I think where I am most concerned here is you guys submitted information to us during a week where we went into a national, state, and local emergency. So not hearing back from the commission is not justification for going ahead with something. I mean, proper communication implies that both entities have spoken, responded, etc. So I'm really concerned that it was just kind of assumed you could go ahead.
Well, actually, I want to clarify that there wasn't an assumption that permission had been granted by lack of a response. I certainly am here on the ground on Nantucket and have a very personal view of what's going on here and how that might differ from the experience of other people off island who are not going through the kind of shutdown that we're having here. And was very clear that we would not likely hear from the commission or the town at any time. It was like trying to get a smoke detector certificate while the fire department's out at a 3-alarm fire. They're not going to do it. And I understood that, and SBPF understood that, and that's why the work that was done was limited to repairing the Hoyks Hollow ramp, which there was no restriction on, and preparing the site through debris removal, which there was no restriction on, with the hopes that we would be shovel ready when the commission was able to give permission, hopefully based on the ability to review the materials that have been submitted to clear the sand, the template being pushed over to cover the tubes and have new sand brought in. And that's what was done. The steps of altering the template to cover the tubes was still on hold at the time Jeff called. We were waiting to hear back, and we were told there'd be an emergency, or this meeting would happen, and that's what we were waiting for.
Jeff, can you correct me if I'm wrong? I don't remember from the debris removal procedure that they were going to be running machines to uncover debris. I thought it was through visual inspection, picking up the debris and, putting it in a loader and removing it. Am I incorrect there?
Just from my recollection, I'll try to pull up the document really quickly since we're online here. If you can give me a minute. I believe the inspection was by visual inspection and then by hand as best possible. And if the debris was too large, then machinery could be used to remove a piece of debris large enough that it couldn't be moved by hand. But if you can give me like 2 minutes, I'll find the exact wording.
Thank you, Jeff. Dwight?
Yeah, I just wanted to that point on December, I think it was the meeting of December 16. I forget the exact date, if it was the 16th or the 18th, but it was that last meeting before the holidays. There was discussion. We, as part of the enforcement order, we had submitted a protocol for debris, we'll call it debris removal from the sand. I was not at that meeting. I looked at the video. Stephen and Jamie were there. There was discussion about spreading the material out to expose it so that it can be picked out on top of the template. We had also discussed that at the February and the March 4 meeting as a way of helping to accelerate any bacterial degradation if needed, but we could see from the results that actually that was not needed. And then the other part of that was when the material gets pushed over, to have workers there to remove any of the debris that falls down along the face of the template during the removal, and also picking it up following the equipment as material is exposed on the top of the template, so it didn't get pushed over the first time. So you need the equipment to basically move the material so that the debris can be exposed and
right.
moved
So Dwight,
by hand.
I don't want to interrupt you, but we hadn't gotten there as a commission yet approving that part of this process. The only thing we had approved from you guys was this visual inspection on what was on the surface, and Jeff is hopefully pulling up that language.
Yeah,
I realized you guys had, proposed other things for the future, but we hadn't discussed those as a commission yet. So, you're kind of putting the cart in front of the horse. Are there any questions from commissioners while Jeff is pulling that up? Maureen? Make sure to unmute yourself.
Okay. I had the same concern you did, Ashley, that this was premature, in terms of kind of assuming that this would be okay to be done. And since we hadn't, I kind of felt like, what did I miss? And I was kind of going through things to try and figure that out. So that was definitely a concern of mine, where the actions that are being taken are, not warranted yet by what we as a commission have just, we had decided we needed to go and do this whole hearing and consider all these things, and we hadn't finished. So I was quite surprised to see that, and frankly not happy to see that either. It's such a, this is such a important and very specific project, and we need to be able, to rely upon the procedures that we set up in advance. And I feel like that did not happen here.
Thank you, Maureen. Seth?
Thank you, Chair. I'm just, this question is directed to the SVPF representatives. I'm just wondering what the purpose was for grading the top of the template and removing the debris. Was it to prepare for future delivery of sand? And also, I'm questioning the timing of. I understand that debris was removed, but why was the debris removed by machinery now versus any other time in the process when it had been done by just handheld visual removal?
Dwight?
The early March storm took out the lower part of the Hogshallow ramp. There was about a 6 to 8 foot cliff at the bottom of that. It also removed and exposed the 2 layers of geotube along the face of the template. It also exposed the northern end returns. All along here, we've been trying to work this as fast as possible, from the discussions going back to December, so that the tubes were not exposed for an unnecessarily long period of time. Where the concerns have been the quality of the sand. 2 rounds of sampling have shown that the sand is free of contamination, chemical and biological contamination. As Stephen mentioned, trying to get that template ready to recover these exposed tubes. We have another big blow coming up this weekend, which is going to mean that there's not sand there to be contributed. It means that there's not sand there to protect the geotubes or prevent or minimize washover at the northern ends. So the idea, as Stephen mentioned, was to have this template, the top of the template, quote unquote, shovel ready, so that the upper layers had been kind of cleared of that debris. So when hopeful that we would get approval, now that it's proven not to be contaminated, that we can be pushing the clean sand over the top and not having that material, any material be in there, and so that it's clear sand being pushed over. But as I said, there was none that was pushed over, intentionally pushed over on Friday. It was just getting it ready for that purpose.
Thank you. It looks like Seth has a follow-up question.
Yeah, I just want to go on the record saying, to me, that sounds like site prep. It's kind of like the same thing as if you're going to build a house and there's a bunch of trees there, the first thing you need to do is cut the trees down. So to me, that seems more like substantive work on the project rather than just continual maintenance of the debris.
Yeah.
Dwight?
Yeah, there was one point that I'm going to be honest, I didn't, in terms of the real details of managing this template. If you went out there this past winter since December, and if you've looked at the condition of the template throughout the winter, you'll notice that there had been gullying, there had been washouts of sand from the template down the face of the template, because the template had not been, because of the cease and desist, the template had not been kind of, I'll say, leveled off. Normally, the way that the crew leaves it is tries to have it level. There was still a good slope from south to north, down from south to north, and it is often maintained so that the top of the table is pitched towards the bluff, so that you don't really, to try to minimize gullying and rill erosion and erosion off the template. That had not happened. So if you went out there, you will have seen that there was a good amount of erosion, going down there. So we probably should have asked back in December for some maintenance grading to occur as needed to avoid that. But we had not asked for that as part of the enforcement order. I agree. But So with that, we wish that we had asked for that so that there could have been some of that maintenance to minimize erosion off the template until all this was resolved.
Okay. Joe has a question.
So do you think it makes sense from now on going forward, within 24 to 48 hours, you guys lobbing an email to Jeff and Ashley and just say, we're going to be on the site. And that way, any calls going on or whatever, they can go to the site and quickly look at it or say that they know the work is being performed. I mean, I was not aware of that a machine was approved in our language, and I'm hoping that Jeff can find some document or something that says it's something along that. But I was not aware that a machine was going to be on site.
Jeff?
Sure. So I have that. Our original enforcement action from December had them submit a protocol that they did. And the first part of the protocol, let me just switch screens here, just reads as follows: that the template will be inspected daily and all observed man-made material will be removed by hand from the template. The attached inspection log will be completed each day. Photos of whatever man-made debris is collected during that day's inspection will be taken and attached to the inspection log. Is the first part of the immediate action for the sand screening that's there.
Thank you, Jeff.
Oh, Jeff, you're still muted.
I switched screens. And that's from going kind of through the discussion of that too. That's the action that you guys had approved to go forward.
Okay. Thank you. That's what I remember. Any other questions or comments from commissioners? From my perspective, I am just incredibly concerned with your ability to follow the conditions outlined for you guys. We are on a potential third enforcement within 6 months. That's crazy to me with a project of this size and, with the potential environmental issues that could take place. I don't know how other commissioners feel about that, but I know that's kind of where I stand on this. Any other commissioners want to weigh in?
Sure. And would this be the appropriate time to read the letter from the Land Council, since they are unable to make a public comment?
I don't know that we're open for public comment yet.
Okay.
But we will read that.
Okay. I'll wait until then, because it really mirrors my own opinion.
Maureen?
Okay. I guess, Ashley, what I've been thinking about is how, on one level, kind of how fragile this project is. This is something that is supposed to, be maintained so that it can last for years. And I was looking at the photos from the site inspections, and unless I missed it, from after that storm through to March 20, you see, there's this, and granted, you're under a cease and desist order, but there's like a constant need for shoring this up and needing more materials and needing more equipment. And so I had thought this would be if you will, a more complete or a more substantial construction, and instead, I personally am worried about the fact that we keep having these problems kind of around the edges, as Ashley was talking about, and I am it makes me feel extremely concerned about how all of this maintenance and such is going to be accomplished in the future. And if we have to, keep having these discussions about, well, we thought it would be okay, and there's use of a machine when our order didn't allow for that, and I just feel like that we're being nibbled at all the time, and it does not. It's just simply not a comfortable feeling. I mean, we should be working together, and I just don't always, feel that way. And again, it just concerns me. So that's what I think.
Thank you, Maureen. Any other questions or thoughts from commissioners? Jeff, do you recommend us opening it up to public comment before we make any votes or motions?
I would think that would be the most prudent option. That way, if there are other issues or questions that are raised by the public, you can address those before making a final decision or having to make a decision and remake a decision after some other information potentially could come in.
Yeah, your counsel would agree with that.
Okay. So if there are no other questions from commissioners, we'll open it up for public comment at this time. Hopefully the YouTube is starting up. I think you may need to refresh your YouTube feed. Okay, so it looks like the YouTube chat is active now.
So this is a letter from the Land Council, and it states, the Land Council has the following comments in regard to this evening's agenda. Throughout 2019, and now unfortunately into 2020, SBPF has repeatedly and continually violated its orders of conditions for the Sconset Geotube project. Specifically, SBPF has 1, failed to conduct quarterly monitoring as required by the permit, 2, failed to conduct biannual video bathymetry surveying, 3, failed to use clean fill, 4, failed to adhere to an enforcement order from the Conservation Commission in relation to the above violations. Not only has the permit holder met multiple failure criteria in 2019 and 2020, but it continues to do so. The latest quarterly monitoring report, number 81, indicates that SBPF continues to interpolate their beach profile data in clear and continuous violation of their permit. Both Mass DEP and the town's independent reviewer, Greg Berman, have recommended against interpolating data, as it is not as accurate as physically measuring the entire beach profile. This calls into question all data SBPF is collecting on beach profiles. With these facts in mind, we request that the Commission, A, acknowledge each of these violations formally for the record, B, determine necessary corrective actions, including but not limited to substantial fines in light of these violations, and communication of such to the Select Board, and C, revisit what constitutes failure criteria and deliberate further on the ramifications of such failure, including grounds for removal of the project in light of multiple continuous and egregious violations of SBPF's permit. Sincerely, R.J. Turcott, Nantucket Land Council.
Thank you, Ian, for reading that.
Yeah.
Jeff, do we have any questions coming in?
Yes. So I have, excuse me, kind of two. They're from Burton Balkind. The first question was, why was a waiver sought through the Emergency Operations Center to do work, and what was the emergency? And then he also had a question if the applicant had admitted if they had broke the cease and, or feel that they broke the cease and desist order that the commission issued in December.
Dwight or Steve, do you want to take that one? Or Jamie?
The emergency management team request was to do any work at all. As the commission may know, the orders from both the town and the governor prohibit any construction with very limited exceptions. And the building commissioner and the police chief and the town manager and Jeff and some other people are on a board that can approve some waivers. And the request that we said was that if the Conservation Commission were to lift the stay and we were able to go out and do work, could this project move forward under social distancing and COVID-19 protocols? And those protocols were laid out in a letter to the emergency management team, and those were approved. And essentially the issue was that if left unchecked indeterminately, the geotube system could be undermined both by a scour at the front, which would undermine the bottom of the tubes, or end scour on the back, on the sides, which could have backwash and result in failure behind, either of which could result in a breach of the road or a destabilization of the road. And so that permission was to seek waiver from the emergency orders that were in place prohibiting any of this kind of work.
And as I mentioned in our letter of the 17th, we had identified that now that the material was clear, we requested a response from the commission through staff to let us know if there was any further information required or requested prior to resumption of maintenance. That was received on the 17th. Through email, Jeff responded on Friday that you all had received it and it was under review. We went through the correspondence with the EMT that went out on Tuesday night. There was correspondence back and forth Wednesday. I talked with Jeff on Thursday when the Hicks Hollow ramp was being done. And Jeff in that conversation said that he would get back to us on Thursday afternoon or Friday morning. The next time we heard was the Friday afternoon work. So as we've discussed, the work on top of the template was just to remove materials so that it was available, skim the top to remove debris before any maintenance would resume. Okay. No maintenance occurred on Friday.
Right, but still what occurred was not within, the clearly set out guidelines for you. So that's unfortunate. Jeff, are there any other questions from the public?
I do have a couple. We do have one comment on the YouTube from Bill McGowan, who just wanted to say, keep up the great work. And he had some more comments there and essentially to be vigilant. And then Burton has also added in that it seems the work done was maintenance. It did nothing to stop the degrading of the template or the geotube. And I need to switch mute for 1 second because we also have the submission from the Coastal Conservancy that had a few more questions. I just have to switch screens for a second here. So we had they put some basic questions that they put forward to the town and submitted to us. Some of these I think we can address. They were curious, and I'll just try to go through them, and then SBPF or the commission can answer those. They were curious what exactly SBPF requested under emergency order number 1. And I think we've discussed that to some degree. They also said, did SBPF discuss the request for permission to resume work with anyone on the Concom or with Concom staff? Did Chief Pittman discuss the request with anyone from the Conservation Commission? Does Chief Pittman and the emergency operations team have the authority to override the cease and desist provision? And then the last question here, what will the CONCOM do in response to SPPF's pushing gray sand onto the beach and hence into the littoral system? And if I may, I'll just tackle a couple of those. Just to clarify, the decision from the Emergency Operations Center does not in any way supersede any Conservation Commission permit or condition that's put forward. It's simply the grant, and I think that everyone's made it pretty clear. It's a grant against the construction moratorium. It doesn't exempt any conditions, reporting requirements, sand requirements. As a matter of fact, they've made it pretty clear that part of the reason they're able to grant those is because there are permits in place to condition those projects correctly, or are in place to condition them correctly, that their operation doesn't supersede that in any way, shape, or form. So hopefully that's clear to everybody. There were a number of emails and calls that went back and forth between all of the groups to get some information as that was going through. The one point that I'll clarify, I am not directly on that emergency operations team. I get consulted if there are questions or concerns directly related to a natural resources interest. So Conservation Commission or shellfish or water quality. But I'm not a part of that direct final decision-making body. That's simply through there. So I'm happy to answer any other questions, or if anyone else has any other responses to those questions, they can feel free to add on, but I wanted to at least get those on the record for the first round there.
Thank you, Jeff.
Jeff, just for the record, just as a slightly better detail, you were consulted by the emergency management team and participated in that process and asked further follow-up questions, and we didn't get permission until after you were provided with that information and were consulted, right? So, and I understand that doesn't in any way constitute permission from the CONCOM. I just want to clear that emergency management team did not operate outside of consulting with you, and in fact actively did.
No, I did provide them some information and did ask some questions that goes with that, yes.
Yeah, okay.
I have a question for Mr. Khan. Steve?
Yeah.
Did you inform well, I guess in part for Mr. Brunk as well, your letter to the building commissioner and the appeal to Chief Pittman, did you mention to either of them that there was an enforcement order in place?
I don't think so. Do you know?
I am
anywhere.
We provided a bunch of information to them. I'd have to go back and check the file to see everything that we included with that, Ian. But the purpose there was, as Stephen mentioned, it was solely to get permission, and Jeff and I had discussed this kind of two gates. You know, we needed to have the gate open to allow work through the moratorium. So if they had said no, nothing would have happened. As I mentioned, we had identified earlier, some 6-7 business days earlier, the intent to resume maintenance because of the second round of sampling being clear, and the skimming was done to prepare for that. We've had communication through Jeff. There was never any clear statement that that resumption of maintenance was not allowed, given the supplemental information.
Okay, so my question follow-up to that is, how then did you assume the cease and desist would just be lifted? I mean, my mind is honestly blown that you just thought you wouldn't have to continue the CONCOM process, like truly. And speaking to what Ian just asked, I read through the letter to Chief Pittman, and I was very surprised that in the background information, nothing said, this has been left unmaintained because we have a cease and desist order that was issued in December. I mean, you went back like to the initial install, and that was all the information you provided. So I don't think you gave them the full story, is the way I read it. And I don't know that they would have granted you permission had you mentioned the cease and desist and enforcement orders.
I don't actually know that it's relevant, because the information that we were trying to give them was whether or not there was a present situation that needed attention, and that present situation existed and needed a waiver from the governor's order and from the town's order, regardless of the Concom issue. Now, we definitely can't proceed outside of the Concom issue without the Concom acting on that. However, the entire permitting history and even the current permitting history are not really relevant to whether or not there's a situation under the moratorium.
Okay. Yeah. Jeff, or Seth, sorry, this question.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, in my opinion, it doesn't really matter what the Emergency Operations Committee did or not. If they had issued SPPF the approval to do a potential work, or if they had said no. The question here is whether SPPF violated the conditions of the cease and desist order that was issued by the Concom. So I think we don't need to get bogged down in what the town did under the COVID-19 moratorium. It's just about what happened related to the cease and desist.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Thank you, Seth. Jeff, are there more questions from the public?
Yes, there are. It's not necessarily, there is a question as part of a comment, but really quickly, I will also, just to clarify, as conservation agent, I don't have the ability to lift a cease and desist that the commission has issued without commission's approval. So I would still have to seek that out. I don't have the ability to work around that. That being said, we do have a comment from David Iverson on the YouTube station here, and his comment is, "It is very concerning that the Concom will continue in an agreement with a party that refuses to abide by the conditions of the agreement." And he continues, "Will there be consequences? And if not, what's to stop this in the future? And with different permits, are you setting a precedent?"
I guess.
And that's the end of the comment. Sorry.
Yeah. I think we're trying to get to the bottom of all that. Maureen, you have a question?
Okay. Seth's point is very well taken, and what is extremely bothering to me is the manner in which the SBPF representatives, it's very hard to see it as something that isn't trying to find another way to get around the requirements that we had established with the cease and desist order. We are all here. It's not difficult. I don't understand why you did not appeal to the Concom and get our support or not for what you wanted to do. And at that point, it would make sense to me, no matter what we said, frankly, if you went to the Emergency Commission, although I don't know who has the ultimate jurisdiction, and George, maybe you'll talk about that at some point, but I am the same thing. I'm reading through this and going, why don't I know about this? And it is, it's very hard. Again, this is supposed to be a working together relationship, and these actions are not those kinds of actions, in my opinion. And trying to do an end run in this emergency situation, and the fact that you didn't even try to appeal formally to the commission. I'm stunned. I mean, why would you not do that? I see no reason whatsoever for your failure to come to the commission if you had an emergency problem with a cease and desist order for some reason, and let us hash it out with each other, we who know all the background. And Ashley's point that you didn't mention the fact that you were subject to this order from the commission, in your application to Chief Pittman, it's frankly, I mean, we used to have an expression that's Bush League, guys.
So commissioners, I just want to go back 1 second to the Land Council letter to maybe get a motion on their points. And I'd also like to make sure we talk to George about potential fining before he has to sign off like 20 minutes or so from now. Is that okay with everybody?
Sure.
Good. Yeah. So is there a motion, I guess, for the commission to acknowledge that SPPF has failed to conduct quarterly monitoring as required by the permit? They have failed to conduct biannual video bathymetry surveying. They have failed to use clean fill. And now they have failed to adhere to an enforcement order from the Conservation Commission in relation to the above violations.
So moved.
Is there a second? Looks like Seth is seconding.
If I may, with respect to the chair, I think logistically it is potentially better to make each one of those motions separately in case there are some that we agree on and some that we don't, but that's my own opinion here.
Can I add to that as counsel again, to Seth's comment? Yeah. I would recommend that strongly, and also in follow-up when you're doing meetings by alternate means, it's important to have a roll call vote on that would clarity on what exactly you're voting on each time, and then call that roll call vote each time.
Yes, thank you, George.
If I could request, we just stick with the items here. There seems to be a history. So Steve,
I'm sorry. I don't appreciate you guys just chiming in without raising your hand and being acknowledged. And I'm, this is the way that we're going right now. Unless commissioners have an objection to that.
No.
Okay.
Can I hop in, Madam Chair? Sorry, my hand is not appearing on my background.
Yes, Jeff.
So I also just want to clarify and just to remind everyone, put on the record that as far as the reporting go, we have already issued out enforcement actions acknowledging that they've failed to conduct those. So if you guys want to put together a summary of those, you guys have already made a motion and voted that to be the case. I would default to George if voting that same thing again has more weight or is viewed any differently. But as far as the first three items go, you guys have already voted as a commission that those were met. And as a matter of fact, that a few of those even met some of the failure criteria in the order. So I don't want to have that get lost in making a fresh motion to do it again. I want to make sure that if we do that, those old ones are not superseded or encapsulated correctly. Does that make sense?
Yeah, George, do you have an opinion on that?
I do. I would follow up on Jeff's comment. I would recommend strongly to limit the amount of new things that you're voting on, and anything that is already established in the record, I would leave as is.
Okay. Thank you.
Then, Madam Chair, shall I make a motion or I'm sorry, Maureen, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. That it kind of those prior violations are kind of in the to my mind, I was thinking of them as kind of whereas clauses, whereas there's been this violation and whereas there's been this violation, and now we get to this new violation of the cease and desist order. But since they are in fact in the record, I think that the fact that we've all recognized that, put it once again in the record of this meeting, I think it would be perhaps more simple to just go with the additional one with a clear recognition that this is on top of two earlier enforcement orders.
Thank you, Maureen. Seth?
Yeah, I just want to respond to one thing that's in the Land Council letter related to the issues with interpolating out to the -5 MLW mark. Well, I think is true, and that hasn't been done in the way the order of conditions says it has to be by actually measuring it rather than interpolating it. I'm not sure that's the basis of today's discussion, and I would be hesitant to support a motion on that without discussing that further.
Yeah, so we're not making a motion on that. The motion at this point is about other enforcement, and specifically now, as George and Jeff have suggested, it would be the failure to adhere to the enforcement order and essentially violating the cease and desist. So is there a motion from the commission?
There is.
So one from Ian. Is there a second?
I second.
Okay, seconded by Maureen. So by roll vote, Mark Beal. You're muted.
Okay. Mark Beal votes aye.
Okay, Seth Engelberg.
Aye.
Arisman, aye. Ian Golding.
Aye.
Dave LaFleur.
Aye.
Maureen Phillips.
Aye.
And Joe Topham.
Aye.
Aye. So that carries unanimously. That SBPF has, failed to adhere to the enforcement order. Okay. So now I guess the question is where do we go from here? I don't know if George can weigh in on potential fining for something like this.
Hi, Ashley. So fining, Jeff will be able to update you on this as well. If you're going to impose a fine, it needs to be factually, based on existing facts as you have them, as you're able to prove. And it also has to be based on regulatory authority. So you just have to be clear what you're issuing the fine about and on what basis under either the state law and regulations or your local bylaw and regulations that you're imposing that fine under. And then, what that's going to be. So I just want to caution, to just make sure that you have the requisite factual basis on the requisite regulatory basis, and you're citing the correct things in support of your fine.
Okay. Thank you.
Sorry.
Jeff?
Yeah, I think I would say if fining is something that you guys are looking to pursue, and based upon George's comments, I think if the commission wants to pursue that avenue, I think having us draft up what that would be and essentially draft up that order and then what the amounts could be based upon current statute, we could put that together and have that ready for our next meeting probably to finalize that. But I agree with George that getting the language of that correct is very important.
Okay. Thank you, Jeff. Mark?
I think we need to make a finding that the work done is in excess of collecting up miscellaneous debris, that it was in fact work on the site itself. I don't know if that's true or not, but I think that will be an important thing to differentiate between just picking up debris, which they're required to do on a daily basis, versus actually getting equipment on the site and up on top of the geotubes and pushing sand around. That's work in my book.
Yeah, I think, and George and Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong, that's covered in failure to adhere to the enforcement order, because the enforcement order didn't allow them to have machinery up there, but it did allow for them to hand collect debris.
Thank you.
Any other questions or thoughts from commissioners?
Well,
Ian?
yes. I mean, at what point does one decide that there have been so many failure criteria that you want to pull the permit? You know, I mean, how long is this going to go on for? When are we going to be meeting again? Maureen was talking about this. And it seems a pretty continuous history at this point.
Yeah, Ian, I appreciate that statement. And I think that it would be important for us as commissioners to formally contact the property owner before we allow anything to move forward on this project. And, you know, get recognition from the property owner and have them explain to us what they are going to do in the future to ensure that we don't have any other violations and enforcements on this site.
I think that's a good idea.
Any thoughts from any other commissioners on that?
I agree with that as well.
I agree with that.
Okay.
I agree with that.
Can I ask a quick question about that?
Yes.
My question through you, Madam Chair, is more to town council on his thoughts on that path.
May I answer, Ashley?
Yes, yes.
Oh, sorry. Well, a couple of thoughts. It's not so much, a legal opinion as much as, number one, right now you have a logistical nightmare in terms of trying to get something for consideration by the property owner, since you're talking about, the property owner being represented through 5 select board members who are, meeting under the difficult circumstance that you are as well, with, meetings by alternate means, and they're dealing with a lot of emergency issues with the current state of emergency. So there's just that one, initial logistical problem in terms of if you're trying to get an answer quickly from them as a board. Having said that, just like any project, this one's a little bit unusual, but just like any project where you have, potential violations and prior violations and concern over the future, you definitely would want to call in the property owner and consult and, try to reach an understanding before you get into a more serious enforcement situation. So it definitely is always advisable for a commission to reach out to the property owner. But again, I just put that caveat there that they have a lot on their plate at this moment, and I understand it's a project of great public interest to Nantucket. But you just have that practical logistical issue of getting it on their agenda at this point. So if you need something that you're trying to get a swift answer from them on, I would keep that in mind, that you don't want to defer whatever it is you think you need to do as an immediate action. You don't want to defer that waiting to be able to consult with the property owner, because that may take a bit.
Thank you, George. I mean, the select board, Jeff, is meeting every Wednesday, correct?
They are. They have a pretty limited agenda right now. Again, I think that's partially due to this kind of format. I mean, obviously, they're not taking presentations or things as much as they would traditionally. I mean, I tend to agree with George that anything that gets sent to them is a little bit slower, just like it is for us. Everything for us right now is just takes a little longer to get through, just for the format and getting information back and forth and getting things scheduled and getting onto the platform. So, I think I tend to agree that's the one slowdown from that end. But I do agree that in past practice, when there are cases of enforcement involving the property owner, has been something that this commission has done.
Yeah, I mean, I realize that we're in a town, state, national emergency. I still think it is important for us to reach out to the select board before we move forward with letting them proceed. And we can take a vote on that if someone has, a motion to see if the commission feels the same way. George, would you recommend us taking a vote on that?
Yes, I would. One caveat too, and just in case I come up against this hard stop, and I apologize, I have another of these meetings by alternate means on for 7 that I have to get on a little bit early for, and that was scheduled before I was notified of this meeting. So I apologize for having that hard stop. So I just wanted to interject one other item in case I, get to the point that I have to leave the meeting before you're adjourned. Would be yes, number one, I do recommend a vote on that. And then number 2, in addition to whatever enforcement activity that you want to take on this, what I would recommend strongly too is that you cover, while you have the applicant before you, not the applicant, I'm sorry, while you have SBPF before you, the one who's operating the project, if there are issues of immediate concern that they are itching to do some work or, cover up sand somewhere or provide mitigation, something like that with upcoming weather conditions or anything, I would recommend strongly, that you try to address that with them so as to avoid any, potential issue that they think that there's something that presents a compelling case that they need to do for, both their project and to protect the environment. I would give them the means to try to do that. And, again, I would reiterate also what Seth had separated from also what Jeff had separated. That's entirely separate from the emergency issue in terms of the town, safety committee in terms of allowing construction projects to go forward or not. It's an entirely separate issue. They got that clearance from the Chief Pittman, and Chief Pittman was very, very clear that that had only to do with their COVID-19 emergency order, and it had nothing to do with any type of existing permitting or enforcement orders or other regulatory requirements that apply to that project. So if you have something, that presents a compelling environmental concern at this point, I would recommend trying to address that if that is the case. I wouldn't want to see you defer action on enforcement and then have something bad happen with respect to the existing project and the beach and the ocean, while you're waiting for that to occur.
Thank you, George. Yeah, I guess I don't know where to go with that. They obviously submitted photos to the town that, it's lacking sand cover. But Ian, you're muted.
Oops. Okay, you didn't hear that, did you? So, George, can you hear me, George?
Yes, but I'm waiting for, I hear you, but I'm waiting for Ashley.
Yes, George, you can answer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I absolutely take your point, but this is a problem of SBPF's making. So, it's not something that we wanted to be dealing with. And I just want, to make that clear.
Yeah, that's a point well taken. My only concern is, and Ashley recognized it's difficult to, what do you do with what I just said? Suggestions on it. If there is some compelling thing that needs to be done on the ground to protect interests that all sides agree must absolutely be protected, you can always allow a limited amount of work to go forward without prejudice to your enforcement rights. So, you can make that caveat. And again, I'm not there. I don't know what the situation is on the beach. But if there are issues requiring immediate, mitigation or remediation, you can always allow that to go forward without prejudice to any enforcement rights.
So, George, I have a question for you about that. Now, because they are, they have multiple enforcements and we have these, failure criteria, at what point do we say that this number of enforcements is a failure of this project and it should just be removed or stopped, without the property owner to weigh in on their perspective? My feeling is we're at the point with all of these enforcements that they shouldn't be moving forward.
Right. My only advice on that would be you have to be very careful and remedy that you would be attempting to achieve, and you would want to have a substantial evidentiary basis for going forward with that, regardless of what the property owner may or may not feel about the project. And remember that these aren't self-affecting. In other words, you can't just order it and expect them to go out and remove it. You could probably anticipate that your order for removal would be challenged. And, again, it's I wouldn't characterize it as draconian because I don't want to insult whatever concerns you think may warrant an order to remove the structure, but very serious remedy that would likely be very vigorously contested, and you would want to have a very strong evidentiary basis for going forward with that type of order.
Right. Thank you, George.
This is Maureen again. Hey, oh no, I don't want to mute it. So Ashley, may I speak?
Yes.
Thank you. George's point, and I mean, obviously we're looking at, there's this, what's happening right now, and Ian's point about the fact that we wouldn't even be talking about this if they hadn't violated the tried to do an end run, as I would put it, around us with the emergency team on island. And so where does that put us in terms of what our next steps need to be? And because of litany, at least me, of past practices where we believe our orders have not been adhered to, and we have concerns with how things are being done, that I would think we would want to go to make a motion to go to the property owner as soon as possible, how soon we can get on their agenda and share with them where we are now. And George, please correct me if I'm wrong. I would think that we don't have to do the most measure. That is, okay, guys, you're out of business and we're done, and take your wall and go home, but that we are looking at substantial fines. We're looking at ways to to ameliorate things at this point in time, and we are, when we've started talking about shutting down the project, and we know that's a really big deal, but to kind of go to them as soon as we can, talk about fines, which I know we would have to have, obviously, clear evidence for that as well, but I think we have it. And then to have a somewhat more discussion with the property owner about what that means and how that goes forward. But I think we should go to the town as quickly as we can and present them what we have at the moment, and because I'm not sure how much detail they're really aware, and as everyone says, they have a lot on their plate. So that's what I think we should do.
Okay. Steve?
Sure. So listen, I appreciate that this commission.
Your audio went out.
Steve, your audio's out.
Your audio's out.
Stephen, we're not hearing you.
It's removed and that they're safe.
Steve, any of that.
Stephen, can you start from the beginning? We couldn't hear you.
No reason to prevent it from being pushed over, and has no reason to prevent further maintenance. And in fact, the most important thing that we've heard from everybody on every side of this issue, the commission, the Coastal Conservancy, everybody, is put the sand down, keep the tubes covered, don't let the ends be exposed, keep contributing sand. And that needs to be going forward immediately, because it is both safe, necessary for the environment, and necessary for the protection of the system. Separately from that, if the commission determines that there was a violation of the enforcement order, which I don't think that there was, but if the commission determines